Can you spot the mistake in this drawing? Would you know how to fix it? Do you know what this is? Can you tell me why this drawing looks flat, but this one doesn't? I'm going to go through 10 things you need to know, because if you don't know these, it can be very hard to improve your drawings. Adding outlines to your drawings is one of the most common mistakes that I see beginners make. Outlines just make your drawings look flat and cartoony. And in nature, there are no outlines. So when we add this sort of outline, it ends up stopping the drawing from looking 3D. It breaks the illusion of form. Here you can see that I've eliminated that outline and instead used shading and shadows to separate these two areas, and you can see that it looks more realistic and there's more depth to this artwork now. One thing that so many artists believe that just simply isn't true is that you need to have expensive supplies in order to create great realistic artwork. But the truth is, you can create amazing drawings with really cheap supplies, and you don't need a lot of pencils in order to create great artwork. I've done so many challenges in the past where I've used cheap pencils, and every time I have been able to create really realistic looking drawings, even though I've not been using the most expensive pencils. So it's important to know that you can just get started with whatever you have, and you can always upgrade to better supplies as you go through your art journey. Value is probably the most important thing to get right in your drawings or paintings for them to look realistic and have depth. A common mistake that I see with a lot of beginners' drawings is that they look really flat. Their shading is just too light, and it can be scary as a beginner to go in with those darker pencils and get in that darker shading. But it's important to know that if you don't get in those darker values, your drawings won't look as 3D and they won't have as much depth. You will see that your drawings will become so much more realistic and they will just start to pop out of the paper. Every week for my mailing list subscribers, I do a critique session where I go through some tips on how to improve your drawings. Most of the time, the drawings just don't look finished yet. They just need a fuller range of values, and in particular, they need that darker shading. And it really can be surprising how much of a difference just adding a little bit of darker shading can make to your drawings. If you're not part of my mailing list and you want to receive those weekly critique breakdown emails where I go through so many tips on how to improve your drawings, then I will leave a link to that in the description as well. Color and value can really play tricks with our mind. Now, value may seem simple, but honestly, it's one of the things that I see beginners struggle with the most. Here are two swatches of shading that are the same value, but something really interesting can happen when you start to add really dark values next to your swatch of shading. Because we've got a really dark value surrounding this swatch of shading, this value actually looks a bit lighter than this one here. It's playing a bit of a mind game with us. But color takes these mind games a step further. Because with color, you've still got to deal with different values, but you've also got to deal with the temperature of the color. Just like how values can look different depending what value it's next to, colors can appear different depending what color they are next to. Because orange is such a warm color, it makes this green look quite cool toned. But on this side, because blue is such a cool color, it makes the green look warmer. But in both of these cases, the green pencil I used was exactly the same. If this is an area that overwhelms you and you get really stuck when it comes to picking the best colors for your drawing, then I recommend checking out a free guide that I created, which will take you through step by step all of the color theory basics you need to know, so that by the end of it you'll feel more confident and have a strategy on how to actually go about picking colors for your drawings. I'll leave a link to that at the top of the description. Not all pads of paper are the same. There's actually so many different types of paper that are all meant for slightly different things. There's lots of things that you could consider when choosing the best paper for you, but the two that I think are the most important to think about are the paper texture and thickness. This one is smooth, and you can see that when I'm doing shading, it lays down very nice and smooth. There's not an awful lot of graininess, but this paper here is a lot more textured, and you can see straight away that even though I'm doing the same swatch of shading, it has a much grainier look, and the difference becomes even more obvious when I switch to a darker pencil. If you're doing sketches or small studies these, then you can use a thinner paper. But for more finished drawings, or for drawings where you know you're going to be doing a lot of blending and erasing, then use a thicker paper to avoid the paper tearing when you're using different techniques, like if you're doing a lot of heavy erasing. My favorite paper to use, no matter whether I'm using colored pencils or graphite pencils, is the Strathmore Bristol Smooth paper. But another option that I use when I do want a bit more texture is hot pressed watercolor paper. I love this for my charcoal drawings where I want the pencil to be able to grip onto the paper a bit more. More detail doesn't actually always mean more realistic. When you try to make your drawing more realistic by just adding more and more detail, what can end up happening is that when you have detail everywhere, your drawing can end up looking a bit cluttered, to the point where the person looking at it doesn't really know what they should be focusing on. This drawing looks realistic, but I haven't added detail to every single part of the drawing. There are large areas like the dress where it looks very blurry. I haven't added much detail at all. And this actually helps with the realism because it gives depth to the drawing, and it also allows the face and the flower headband to become the focal point. We're drawn to this area because this area is in detail, it's sharper. By being more intentional about which areas you make detailed, you can actually create a drawing that has more depth and doesn't look cluttered. Color is not as important as you think it is. The truth is that you can change your colors quite a bit and your drawing will still look realistic. What's more important is that you get your values accurate. In this example, again, you can see that I'm changing the colors quite a bit, increasing the saturation, changing the hue, and the reference still looks realistic because the values are still the same, which basically means that I've still got the lights and darks in the right place. I did a drawing recently where I was trying to challenge myself to do a portrait with only 5 pencils. So obviously it was going to be super hard to match the colors of the reference. But you can see here that even though the colors aren't exactly the same as the reference, the drawing still turned out looking realistic because I really focused on making sure that I got all my lights and darks in the right place, and I just tried to get the colors as close as I could to the reference. One thing that all of these artworks have in common is that they are all mixed media art. Now, I love doing mixed media art because you can really utilize the different benefits of each medium, but a lot of the time you have to do it a certain way round in order for them to work well together. First of all, consider whether the supply you want to use is waxy or oily. Color pencils are normally wax-based or oil-based, and this means that color pencils have a glossy finish to them, which makes it very hard for any other supplies to stick on top of layers of colored pencil. Colored pencil works well with other mediums when it is applied as a top layer. So for example, if you was to use pastels first and then add colored pencil over the top. It's also important to consider whether you are using wet or dry mediums. For example, if you want to use watercolor with colored pencil, because colored pencil is waxy, if you was to use colored pencil first and then add watercolor over the top, the watercolor won't stick on top of the colored pencil. It won't work that way round. You need to add the watercolor first and then colored pencil over the top. The next thing you should know is that erasers are for so much more than just erasing mistakes. There are 3 different types of erasers that I like to use for my drawings. The first one is just your standard eraser that is good for just erasing mistakes. Next is the kneaded eraser, and this is an eraser that you can actually mold, which means that you can erase precise markings. With this eraser, you can erase areas and get a softer edge. It's also useful if you just want to pull up a little bit of the graphite. The stick eraser is great because you can create really tiny details and highlights with this. It pulls up the graphite really well. It has a nice sharp edge, which makes it really good for creating details. This is my go-to eraser for adding texture to my drawings. By using all 3 of these types of erasers in your drawings, you can create even more highlights in your drawings and add so much more detail and texture, which really helps to make your drawings look more realistic. When I did this drawing, this is the reference that I was working from. And most artists pick a reference like this one and just start drawing straight away. The first thing I actually do is edit edit my photo and remove the saturation until it is a black and white photo. A really common mistake that I see artists make is actually draw using the colored reference, but it just makes it so much easier to judge your values and how dark your shading should be if you simply just turn the photo to black and white. It's really hard to compare values for different colors, but making it black and white just takes out all the guesswork, and you can really easily compare the value now for those flowers compared to her lips. So this is something you should do if you are doing a grayscale drawing or painting with something like graphite or charcoal. Understanding things like values and avoiding outlines will really help you improve your drawings, especially if you're doing realistic drawing. And if you also love realistic drawing but you're struggling with it, it may be because you haven't accepted a few harsh realities that come with realistic drawing. So check out this video next, where I go through some harsh realities of realistic drawing that you need to know and you can't avoid.